Well, welcome back, and thank you for listening to the PNR Churchman. It's been a while for me, and I've had a lot of things going on this summer and haven't been very organized. But our guest today is a guest I've wanted to have on for some time. He's a new friend. I've known him about a year, and he's in the presbytery that our church has just recently joined since General Assembly redrew some boundaries. He is ruling elder Cory. Cory, welcome.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you having me on. I've watched this podcast and enjoyed it thoroughly for, probably 6-8 months now.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. Thank you for that. And so why I want to have you on, you're ruling elder, obviously, and we'll get into some of that, but also to help expose people in the PCA to your work and your podcast, CivEccly Minded. And, it's like, we really need another podcast. Actually, we do. You're not podcasting about polity, not devotional. It's actually like living Christianity out in the world, what's known as public theology, or perhaps even political theology in some cases. And I think this is, or what you're doing is a very needed thing in our denomination in particular, because there's a lot of reactions going on to how we interact and live out our faith and what we can expect in the world. And so I think you try to navigate that, and I like the way you do it.
Oh, thank you. It's a niche. Again, sometimes I think I must need my head examined to be talking about all of this stuff, because some of it can be pretty polarizing topics. And I think a lot of things in today's world, whether theologically or otherwise, come down to who gets to define terms.
Yes.
So when people watch my stuff, and folks that even at my own church have approached me and said, well, let's sit down and talk about that, and let me tell you what I think those terms mean.
I do think defining terms is important, but I'm less interested in terms more and more, because language is plastic anyway,
Yeah.
And I don't even like to be put in a bucket. I'd rather have a conversation about what I believe, So even in the eschatological discussion, are you post-mill? Are you a-mill? Are you, it's like, well, I can definitively tell you I'm not a dispensationalist or pre-mill, but I don't like the a-mill, post-mill discussion, because there's post-mills I agree with, and there's post-mills I don't agree with, and there's a-mills I agree with, and there's a-mills I don't agree with. And the best term or bucket I think I have for myself, and this is probably a cop-out for a number of people, but I'm an optimistic a-mill then.
Mm-hmm.
I expect that the kingdom of God will spread and grow, and that is not simply a spiritual reality, but it will yield natural fruit in a physical world. What bucket does that put me in,
No, I agree with that. I think, which is one of the reasons that I started my channel, right? Was how do I, benefit the people at my own church, who a number of them do watch pretty regularly, pardon me. My own family, because my mom watches, and my brothers and some of my older brother's got 2 grown kids. His son, watches a lot, and he's asked for sweatshirts and stuff. He wears them around his college campus, so I'm grateful for that, of course. But,
I got my mug, but I'm not. It's at home. It showed up in my cupboard. I was on a scavenger hunt for my CivEccly Minded swag that you told me you left for me with some stranger at the church, and then I found it at home. So apparently it got to you. Yeah, it got to my wife, I think.
But so
it's heavy. I gotta be. I can't use your mug. I can't use it in the morning. I got to tell you that it's too. There's too much girth to that giant mug first thing in the morning.
I don't drink an 8-ounce coffee, in the morning, or even a 10-ounce. I want a good, solid 12 to 14 ounces of coffee for my first cup of coffee in the morning. So when I went to specking out what mugs I wanted for merchandise, I was like, I want a nice big cup.
It's not just big; it's actually heavy.
Yeah, it's a well-made cup. So I get whatever enjoyment out. Eat soup out of it, maybe.
Okay.
So, But yeah, how could I help my people? How could I help my family? And more than anything, just for anybody that tuned in, Christian or non-Christian, how can I start putting a public face out there that does start to talk about all of these topics that the church, I think, in my opinion, had somewhat abandoned over the last 40 or 50 years. I mean, I'm 46 years old. I remember as a young boy, the religious right was still kind of a big deal. The what was called the moral majority. You know, I grew up in the Baptist world. And so in the Baptist world in the early 80s, especially in the Southern Baptist world in the early 80s, there was what was called the conservative resurgence. And they were already struggling all the way back then with liberalism. And they didn't have a J. Gresham Machen to write an awesome book about it. So what they did have were men like Adrian Rogers, you know, wonderful saints of the SBC tradition. And there are many, to all of the Presbyterians listening. There are tons of guys in that tradition that are faithful men of God who have served faithfully for years. And those men rose up in the late 70s and early 80s, and they wrestled back the denomination from the brink of liberalism, and it was called the conservative resurgence. And out of that was kind of the whole Liberty University movement, and all of those guys helped form what would become known as the moral majority. And whether you liked them or didn't like them, what I have to say I have learned to appreciate about those men is you never had to wonder where they stood on some topic that was coming down the pipeline. You know, so the soul of America is always up for grabs. I mean, let's not pretend that this is a new thing that's going on just in 2024. This has been going on since the inception of this nation, and of course since the inception of every other nation. And so at least those men, the Jerry Falwells of the world, or the Billy Grahams, whoever you want to say from that era, you never had to wonder where they stood on a particular hot topic. You know, and you may not have agreed with their entire position, but they at least spoke out and would say, look, the Bible has this and such to say about whether it was homosexuality or you know, the rise of feminism or just the rise of liberalism in general. And when I look across the landscape of America today, especially the ecclesiological landscape, I just wasn't seeing that many of those guys left. You know, not with any kind of regularity. You still have John MacArthur, John Piper, a lot of these guys that were exceedingly vocal and were unabashedly Christian are gone, you know, and I just don't see the younger men stepping into those voids. And I'm not saying that that's what I'm trying to do, at least not to the scale that those guys did. But I thought, you know, there are people I love, people I care about. And if I can be a voice of reason to help them think through things a little more cogently, you know, or a little more biblically, then I'd sure like to do it.
Yeah. So, wow, that whole thing might be really surprising to hear, given the context, because there's such a backlash against the moral majority now and the whole project. But I think I even bought into that for a little while, honestly, because I get it. Like, my own impression of the whole thing is they were doing a good thing, and somewhere along the way they lost their way because it became about it was a culture war.
Yeah.
But when I read like Christian Manifesto by Francis Schaeffer,
yeah.
And he says, I think somewhere toward the end of it, like, I get it, you don't like what we're doing. Okay, do it better, you know. But his point was, while there's an open window in this country, we need to be standing against secular humanistic ideology. And his point was, Christians, you know, right from the beginning, he says, Christians have a problem of viewing things atomistically, individually, like instead of seeing the big picture and the connected whole. And like, I think he's right. You know, we see like our kid comes home with some idea and we don't connect that to the larger worldview that's at play in that idea. It's like, no, that thing is wrong, without giving them the proper corrective on how to view it, like Christianly. For Schaeffer, the big thing, I mean, Schaeffer's amazing sort of individual when you think about him. I mean, the way I describe him is he's like running a hippie commune overseas, talking about art and, woo. And then he becomes the poster child for the moral majority Christian right. And he gets in with Falwell and all these guys. And what was the reason for that? Because while they're sitting around, in their discipleship commune talking about art, they're slaughtering babies now. Roe versus Wade happened. And they're talking about euthanasia. I mean, that was a big issue in the 70s. And I mean, when you read Christian Manifesto, the book was prophetic. I mean, it talked about the new authoritarianism that was going to happen in the world was going to be based on a technocratic elite, what he called sociological law and sociological medicine, and the courts and an intellectual elite like being the authorities instead of even the government, And so when you think of technocratic elite, like, he didn't have social media back then, or, any of the advances we have now in this, in the last 10 years. But for them, it was like medical science ethics were being driven by what we can do and sociologically such that like, well, this will alleviate, some kind of a therapeutic, it's a therapeutic solution to somebody's problem,
Yeah.
So abortion is a therapeutic answer to the grief that the woman has, as opposed to like, no, this is a moral thing. Like, you are taking a life, And when you see where we are 40 years later, like, oh my goodness, that's exactly what it is. Like, the courts have not made judgments based on the law and the Constitution, but based on therapeutic, what they think is best for society. And the same thing in the medical industry, and the same thing with how technology is being used. And so all that to say, when Schaeffer says, maybe we're going about this wrong, but okay, do it better, And I think when we look back and we judge that era and what they were trying to accomplish, I don't think they were wrong. I think they lost their way because the culture war seemed more important, and what we were losing and what happens is a lot of things get co-opted into that. So what we're losing as Americans because of whatever, that's not the reason that we should be standing on the law of God for society. We stand on the law of God for society because that's actually loving to neighbor.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make, when Russell Moore says he's glad this isn't the 1950s anymore, this isn't Mayberry, and that's a good thing, because like the implication is, well, all those people were hypocrites. They weren't all Christians. Yeah, it was a much nicer world to live in for a lot of people. And I'm not saying it was perfect, obviously, with what was going on with race and other things, but like, is this better?
No one wants to look at facts anymore. Feelings are ruling. That is when, again, you talked about when people look back on the moral majority. When people look back at our own time, you get 100 years out and people look back at the 2020s, they're going to look back on a people and on a generation and say, what a weak, feelings-oriented, I mean, we've become such a squishy people that are driven, 100% driven by how I feel about an issue instead of the veracity of an argument. And our founding fathers, whether you're talking this nation's founding fathers or whether you're talking about, in the church, our own church fathers, would look at men like us. And I use that corporately. I hope I live better than this individually. But I would look at corporately an age like ours and say, what weak, pathetic men you've become, and you can't think through an argument. You don't have the fortitude or the emotional stability to talk through an argument. And sadly, the church is guilty of this. We see this. I see this on X all the time, where this group or that group, doesn't see eye to eye, and they refuse to talk about it. They refuse to have any actual discourse about it. It's just easier to take your polarized position, stand and plant your flag in there and say, I'm taking my ball and going home. And I think, where does that get us? I've got, you can't see them here on my bookshelf, but I have 3 bound editions of what was the newspaper of the day back in the first century of our country's history. It was called Harpers Weekly. Now there's Harper's Bazaar, which is actually a magazine that is awful, but was born out of that same company. But back in those days, newspapers weren't dailies, they were weeklies. And Harper's was the biggest newspaper in America, and they put out a weekly publication. And then at the end of the year, they did a bound edition, which was all 52 weeks. Well, I have 3 bound editions right behind me on my bookcase from the Civil War, originals. They're not reprints. These are original. My wife surprised. I've been a history guy for my whole life, so I have those. I have. She surprised me with a huge kind of. It was an anniversary, Christmas, birthday, all lumped into one. It was these 3 editions. I have a Luther Bible from the 1700s in German, and I have the Bible that preceded the King James, the
Geneva.
The Geneva. I have a Geneva Bible from 1592. So she found a guy that specialized, I think he's in the Raleigh-Durham area, who specializes in old books, and she drove over to his shop and just surprised me with these. But
no, but show us some. Show us.
Let's see. Let's see here. The other 2, the 2 Bibles are so old they're in a safe. So, but this is one of my bound editions. Let's see here, of Harper's Weekly. Let me get it on camera.
Wow.
So, it's let's see if I can get it open here, and I'll just show you one of the pages. One of the what's called a woodcut. Now, a woodcut was kind of what they would do for where we would have photos nowadays. Of course, they didn't have that technology yet, so they had what were called woodcuts, which were exactly what they sound like. They would actually draw a picture and then kind of carve it into the pulp, and it would so there's actually texture to these photos. So that's like a woodcut here on one of the pages of my Harper's Weekly, and this one is from, I think, 1861. Let me double check here. Nope, this is 65. So I have a bound edition from 1861, 1863, and 1865. So that's, of course, the year the Civil War started. 63 would be the year that the Emancipation Proclamation was declared. And then 65, of course, is the year the war ended. And so I have all 3 of those bound editions. So when I said when I say things on my channel and I talk about I've studied, primary sources, I have primary sources in my house. Not only have I read some of these things, I own some of these things. So I know that sometimes on podcasts and various things on YouTube or wherever you consume your media, we can go, what does this guy know? Or what? And a lot of times that's true. And I don't have like a doctorate in U.S. history or anything like that, but I have had more than a passing fascination about our founding fathers and about our history since I was a kid. I mean, I remember turning 18 and I celebrated because I could go vote. And then, I was in college and everybody was turning 21 and they were like, man, you're turning 21. Isn't that cool? I was like, I've been voting for years. That was the cool one. I couldn't have cared less about turning 21 and getting to have a beer. That really didn't, not that I have a problem with that, but the cool thing had already happened for me. I wanted to vote. It was the biggest deal in my life. And because of when I was born, I turned 18 on the year of a presidential election. And so it was like, I was like, man, not only am I turning 18 this year, I get to vote for president on my first, opportunity to do so. So no, I'm just that kid. Or that man now, but I was that kid back then. So I've always been fascinated by these topics, and I've been a Christian, since I was a kid. So the 2 just kind of grew up together in my heart and in my mind. I didn't have to work hard to try to come up with some political theology or political philosophy. I didn't know that the 2 weren't coexistent. I just grew up in a world where those were my 2 favorite topics, and my parents were Christians and they encouraged it. And I look back now and people ask me how CivEccly Minded started, and I'm like, I don't know. In my personal life, I don't know that there was ever a time that it didn't exist. This is just something I've been into my entire life. And, so.
Talk to us about the name.
Yeah, so civically minded obviously is a colloquialism that most people have heard. Oh gosh, that guy's or that gal is civically minded, because they volunteer their time, at a soup kitchen or whatever. So I was driving from my house to go run errands one day, and I live out in the country, so I was on these really kind of pretty country roads, and there's not a lot of traffic, so I was kind of zoning out, just on autopilot. And my wife and I had already discussed starting the podcast, and I wanted something that was going to be catchy and would kind of encapsulate what I wanted to do. And I was talking to another friend of mine, and he had said the comment something about, well, you've always been pretty civically minded. And I thought, that's not a bad name. And then as I started playing with the name and knowing that I'm, a ruling elder under care, hoping to, become a teaching elder in the next year or so. So I wanted to somehow play off of that part of my life too. So I spelled it CivEccly. So civics, ecclesiology, and family. So CivEccly Minded. And then it's just civically minded. And so people ask all the time because they're like, that's not how you spell that, right? And I'm like, well, I know but there is meaning behind it. So civics, ecclesiology, and family.
I think anybody in the PCA get like when they say it, they're like, oh yeah, civics, ecclesiology, but the family piece is cool. I didn't pick up on the LY there.
Yeah.
For that. And that's, so those are some spheres.
Well,
to talk about.
Exactly. So kind of it got into sphere sovereignty a little bit as well, which is a topic again that I've always been pretty passionate about. So when you talk about like Shearer, I'd read Communist Manifesto when I was a younger man, and then reread it, just about 4 or 5 years ago. I loved, absolutely adored How Should We Then Live?
Wait a minute, you read Communist Manifesto? That's what you said.
No, pardon me. I have read Communist Manifesto, actually. So yes, I have. I used to have a copy of it. I have read it. I used to have a copy of Mao's Little Red Book that I got while I was overseas in Asia. I've read that. I'm interested in political theory, so I have actually read those. But no, Christian Manifesto. Pardon me. I read the Christian Manifesto as a young man, and then reread it, like I said, about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But it was Schaeffer's How Should We Then Live that really just blew my mind as a probably 17, 18, 19-year-old. And I went to college at Columbia Bible College and what is now called Columbia International University. The change between the names happened actually while I was there. And one of the freshman courses you had to take was Western Civilization. And the Western Civ class, which was taught by a man who's went on to be with the Lord by the name of Dr. Jack Lehman, and just a wonderful man of God, and taught me so much. He would say, I did. You didn't ever pay attention, but I was paying attention. I just like to talk. And I know no one picks up on that with the podcast guy. But Dr. Lehman would take us through How Should We Then Live? And if you've never seen the accompanying videos that Shearer made for that, they are free on Amazon Prime. If you ever want to watch them, they are. See, they're so nostalgic for me now. I understand how awful they are.
Yeah, they're awful. They really are.
He's wearing like knickerbockers, and they seem so dated. It's ludicrous, but the content is still really good. But it's hard to take the content seriously.
It's really hard to take the content seriously. But yeah, I tried. About 2 years ago, I tried, or 3 years ago, and I couldn't do it.
During COVID, when you had nothing better to do.
Yes, but I read it. I read it, but I just couldn't watch the videos.
But yeah, so these are topics that I've just always been into, and so it was just kind of a natural outgrowth of who I am as a person. And then some people in my church kind of encouraged me when after my wife encouraged me. It was encouraging enough for it to be kind of the nail in the coffin between having my wife's support and then having some men that I respect quite a lot say, yeah, we think it'd be a good idea. That was all I needed to kind of dip my toes in and see if I even enjoyed it. And then that didn't take long.
Yeah, you're built for it, man. Your voice, you got a good podcast voice and a good demeanor. So
well, thank you.
Yeah. So Okay, so what's the name of the church you're at?
I am at Shearer Presbyterian Church in Mooresville, North Carolina. We have been around for 140 years or so. We were started by John Bunyan Shearer. He was the president of Davidson College at the time. And our church has sat on the same little plot of dirt since then. It's
Davidson College. Wait a minute. What NBA players went there?
Steph Curry.
Yeah, that's why. Okay.
Steph Curry was a Davidson grad.
Wow. So Shearer, and what's your role there?
I am the pastoral intern, assistant to the pastor. It's again, I know a lot of Presbyterians watch your channel, so I will be brave enough to say what we all know to be true, and we know it to be we so know it to be true that actually it came up at General Assembly this year. It was something we all voted on, and I voted in the majority way. I agree. I think titles matter and things like that matter. So I agreed with the majority that kind of codified what we decided this year. But if you asked the average person at Shearer, they'd go, "Well, he's like our associate pastor," and I'm always like, "No, I'm not. I'm not ordained, and I cannot hold that title, and I don't. It's so for all watching, I don't hold that title. I don't claim to hold it, but
you are a ruling elder.
But I'm a ruling elder, and I operate as the pastoral intern. I preach once a month. I teach an adult Sunday school class. I had been a deacon and the chairman of the diaconate for a while. Kind of anything they need, I try to jump in and help out where I can.
Yes. And you'll be ordained soon?
Hopefully next year. That's the goal. I would like
as
to
a TE, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to finish up seminary and go through licensure and ordination next year. But I'm a middle-aged guy with 3 small kids, so licensure more than ordination. Not that ordination's easy. I would never say that. But of the 2 exams and what I've asked about them and talked to a lot of you that have been through it, it's and having not grown up in the PCA. The catechism wasn't something I did as a kid. I was a Baptist kid. So learning the shorter catechism at 46 years old with 3 small kids and all the other responsibilities, I will be honest, it's a daunting task. God will be gracious and he will help me get through it, I'm certain. But
well, the memorization is hard. It's hard to memorize things at our age, or I'm almost 50 now. I will be soon. So yeah, the memorization piece was hard. And I'm trying to think what year I was ordained in. I was already over 40. And so when I was studying for my licensure and ordination exams, that was a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Verbatim memorization, but yeah, God gets you through it. So my path was similar I was a deacon, I was a ruling elder, came on staff at the church as a ruling elder, and eventually got ordained as a teaching elder. Yeah. So how'd you discern, what'd you do before coming on staff at the church?
Again, because I know a little bit of your story, because we become friends, kind of similar to yours. Not that I was an engineer or any of that, but I was all over the board. So as I already said, I went to Bible college at 18, and nobody goes to Bible college unless you feel a reason to, because there are Christian liberal arts schools, and you can still go to a Christian school and get a liberal arts degree. Whereas Bible college is really primarily for folks that felt like they were being called into ministry. So even at 18, I felt God calling me into something. Now, back then I was traveling and touring with a Christian rock band, and I would have told you that was what God was going to call me into. I was convinced that we were going to be the next, DC Talk or Petra or Newsboys or, fill in the blank, whatever your favorite Christian rock band from.
Is anything still online? Is any of your stuff?
The song that is during the intro of my podcast, when my logo comes up, is a song that we did. It's a song I wrote, and I wrote the lyrics to, and our guitar player wrote the music to, and it's we had a 4-song EP, and apparently, and I did not know this until about 10 years after we broke up, our bass player who did a lot of that was kind of his big gift was he was good at the business side of it. And he's always been good at networking with people. And he had not told us at the time because we were already kind of imploding as a band, but he had been talking to, they're a defunct record label now, but back in the day, there was a record label called 5 Minute Walk Records. And probably the biggest band on 5 Minute Walk Records was a group called Five Iron Frenzy. They were a Christian ska band, and I think they still exist. Actually, they're just, of course, on a different label because 5 Minute Walk doesn't exist. But about 10 years after we broke up, I heard from our bass player that he was in talks with the president of 5 Minute Walk, who had listened to our EP and was really interested in maybe signing us. And we were like, what? So 10 years too late. But again, God's providence is so kind.
I'm hung up on Christian ska. I didn't know if that was even.
Oh, Christian ska was better than secular ska. So the biggest ska, and I was into ska, which one dates me, and two also probably makes me look like a total dork in some people's eyes, and that's okay. Like I did the black and white outfit and the whole nine yards, which you have to be from the growing up in the 90s to even know what we're talking about. But the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones were probably the biggest secular ska band of the era, and
popular ska.
Yeah, popular ska.
Yeah, I went to a few. I went to a few shows.
And then, but the Christian world had Five Iron Frenzy, and then the OC Supertones, and both of them were so well respected even in ska communities. So yeah, Christian music in the 90s. If you didn't live through Christian music in the 90s, it is hard to explain to somebody now what a big deal Christian music in the 90s was. That like Jesus Freak was played on MTV. You could see the Jesus Freak music video on MTV. That Jars of Clay's song Flood off of their first album was like used on movie soundtracks. I mean, it is hard to ascertain how big Christian music, rock music was. And it was just a weird time. Christian music had totally penetrated the cultural psyche. And the 90s was such a broad musical spectrum to begin with. It was, you could kind of hear anything on the radio at any given time.
But even into the early 2000s, I remember, Third Day was, I think, was it Pepsi? Like they actually had like major corporate sponsors of secular, it was a big deal.
Yeah. All the way back to the 80s. Amy Grant had some hits both in the 80s and the 90s. Michael W. Smith with Place in This World, which was a top 40 hit in the 80s. So yeah, we've don't down on Christian music, folks. We've had our limelight. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know that Amy Grant's the best example, but
no problem. Not.
It's funny. I remember.
Certainly not these days.
I was a little kid, and I heard those debates going on among my grandparents and aunts and uncles, because that was like when she did that song "Baby Baby" and in the MTV video without, it wasn't her husband in the video with her, and it was like, no doubt.
Well, and Dan Hazeltine, who's the lead singer of Jars of Clay. Some of them have come out as very pro LGBTQ, and so no, they some of them have done some things that I'm pretty disappointed in, if I'm being honest. But
so wait, what's your take on Creed?
They have just gotten back together. Actually,
I saw that.
I liked Creed. No, I didn't. I never thought of them as Christian, but I liked Creed.
Well, they were Christian. He was Christian sing. But I liked Creed too. I guess that makes me a poser. I don't know.
Yeah. And I like Nickelback. And I always think these groups don't sell, 30 million albums because just I like them. So I had my Columbia House membership. I got my 10 albums for a penny. Don't get me wrong. I had a lot of albums.
Yes.
But these groups that we all love to pan on now, it's not like they sold 30 million albums on accident. We can all say Hootie sucks and Creed and Nickelback, and they're all, but someone was buying 30 million albums. These guys didn't sell those to nobody.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a PCA podcast that has talked about Christian ska.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think people have tuned out by now. That's what.
Yeah, you've got a couple that are like quietly going, "This is the most amazing day of my life."
Yeah,
So
maybe there are some rockers in among some of these younger PCA pastors that they had a phase. So I should connect you with some of those guys. I know.
well, and that's
I
what's
won't
funny
out
about you
them
is
because they're on certain committees in the PCA, and I don't want to. They're
you
trying to
can
hide their
connect
past.
anybody in the PCA. That's one of the most amazing things about you, my friend. Is I don't know that there's a man in the PCA you don't know.
It is funny and weird. People know I'm a useful. What do they call me? A useful idiot or something?
I don't know about the idiot part, but you are a good connector of people. You have an unbelievable talent, and I mean this as a compliment. You have an uncanny talent of being very disarming and very approachable and kind of connecting people that maybe wouldn't connect otherwise, and that's a pretty big gift to have. So you can so useful certainly, but I don't know about the idiot. But you did ask a more prescient question, and we got sidetracked on my musical career, and that I put that very mildly.
Or lack of.
Or lack thereof. That's right. But people did pay to buy our EP and pay to come see us play. So I was at least semi-professional, and so there's that. But no, I'd worked 11 or 12 years in the restaurant industry. Went to culinary school after I got out of Bible college, just because I needed something hands-on. I was really tired of reading 4.5-inch thick tomes. So after 4 years of Bible college, which I did not graduate from because I was easily distracted back in those days, and just about March, when the weather would start turning in Columbia, South Carolina, and it started getting nice, I just didn't like going to class. I just was like, oh, the weather's turning. Let's go do something awesome and have fun and enjoy God's nature. So I was a bad student, and I say that to my shame. I wish I would have taken the opportunities God put in front of me more seriously, and I mean that. I regret the disrespect that I showed my professors and things, and I was too immature at the time to see that that's what I was doing, but it was, and so I worked in the restaurant industry for 11 or 12 years after I went to culinary school, and then I got into real estate. I still hold a real estate license here in North Carolina and in South Carolina. I come from a family of real estate agents. My grandparents were both realtors. My parents both realtors. My brother's a realtor. My wife's a realtor. So that was an industry I kind of understood and knew. So when my dad said, hey, you don't have any other prospects, why don't you go get your license and come work with us? I said, sure. And then I spent 18 years practicing real estate professionally, and a great career. I enjoyed it. Some years were extremely good, and other years, like during the '08 crash, were extremely hard. I owned a property management company with my mother for a while, where we managed a lot of single family homes, like 300 of them. So, I mean, a lot of single family homes. I used to have hair before I pulled it all out. I worked for a new home builder as a on-site sales agent, like where you'd walk into a model home and I'd be the guy that would greet you and try to sell you a house. So I've done a lot in that industry, and all of the while, kind of late into my real estate industry career, I was at Shearer already, and I had met Pastor Stout, Dr. Steve Stout, who's the pastor there at Shearer, and I had kind of got to know each other. And he also went to CIU, oddly enough. He went to CIU back in the day for his undergrad.
A lot of guys did.
Yeah, so we connected there. And then my church career at Shearer is God, obviously, as it is for all of us. He is just gracious beyond grace, and I didn't see any of it coming, because I thought I had walked away from that calling years ago. I thought, life just went a different direction, and I'd kind of closed the chapter on that and thought, I still have my three best friends in the world are guys I went to Columbia with, so I didn't view that time as wasted. I was like, hey, I made three great friends from it, and I have good memories, and I learned some. But then I was at Shearer, and Steve came to me and said, well, you're Bible college educated. Would you think about maybe teaching a Sunday school class? And I said, yeah, I guess. So I started teaching a Sunday school class, an adult class, and God blessed, and it grew, and then him and one of the other elders approached me and said, you ever thought about being a deacon? And I said, well, not really. And they said, well, we'd like you to pray about it. And so I did. And of course, ended up getting nominated and agreed to serve as a deacon. And then after serving as a deacon and then eventually serving as the chair of the diaconate, they came to me and said, well, what would you think about serving on the session as an elder? And I mean, I honestly call it stupidity or just, agreeableness. The only thing that I will ever say to my own credit, and this is the lowest bar that someone could possibly pass, so don't be impressed, was I had the naivety or stupidity to just keep saying yes. I just didn't know to say no. So every time these men who I greatly respected and who had proven they loved me and cared about me both as a human and as a Christian kept saying, hey, would you serve in these ways? I just was too dumb to say no. So I just kept going, yeah, sure. So I think it was the first year I was serving as an elder that Dennis Drennan, who's our clerk of session, and Steve Stout, our pastor, and then a man named Bill Everett, who's also a member of our session, an elder at the church. Those three men at various times, they didn't gang up on me, but at various times, they all three came to me and said, would you consider going to seminary? Have you ever given that any thought? We think that God's gifted you in certain ways, and we see, a call on your life. And they were dredging up things in my heart and in my mind that I hadn't felt in years. And God used these three men to kind of bring back that passion and call that I'd felt at 18. And they encouraged it. I talked to my wife about it. She said, absolutely not. I don't want to be a pastor's wife. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to do this if you're not with me. I've seen too many pastors go through that, where their wives are against it. And then inevitably it ends up kind of sidelining their ministry because the wives and them are not on the same page. And then about a year after all of that happened, my wife came to me with tears in her eyes one morning and said, I will not stand before God and have to give an account as to why you weren't the man God wanted you to be, because I wasn't going to allow it, So she said, you do it. I've known since day one this was right and it's what God was wanting. I just didn't want it, and He's worked in my heart, and I'm not gonna keep fighting him. So
well, praise God. That's a great story, man.
Yeah. So once she was on board, it was kind of Katie bar the door.
Well, that's great. So again, very similar to my own pathway in that, I was elders and a pastor recognizing gifts in me, asking me to teach a class, asking me if I thought of being a deacon. I think there was a difference. I did feel the call earlier, not to be a pastor, a teaching elder, but certainly I thought the Lord was leading me to be a ruling elder. I had started seminary already, but I think the thread of the church raising up men that they see the Lord working in is just an important one. If we want to do leadership development, if we need more elders, if we need more people serving, the time to start pouring into people is not the time you need them. It's are we recognizing gifts in men and meeting them where they are to develop those gifts and demonstrate those gifts such that we are, presenting everyone complete in Christ. And if the Lord makes those individuals officers, well, there you go. And if not, well, everybody in the church should be serving. And so sometimes saying yes could be haphazard. Like you said, you just keep saying yes, but there is also a willing heart to say, obviously I see the Lord using this. There's a desire there and people are asking me to do things and I have no reason to say no. It's here I am, Lord, send me. And so that could be a good thing. So yeah, well, I'm excited to be co-laboring with you in Presbytery. That our first meeting that I'll be at this will be the first official meeting where I'm a member of the Presbytery. Mm-hmm. And so that's great news. It's a good group down there in Catawba Valley, and we're excited to be a part of it. I guess, is there any final thoughts you have before we close?
Yeah. I talked about being in seminary. Let me plug my seminary a little bit, because it's really kind of an amazing thing, an amazing place. And I say it's an amazing place. It's not a sticks and bricks seminary, and that's one of the advantages that it has. I am enrolled in Lamp Seminary, which is really kind of birthed out of the PCA. It's part of our M&A ministries, which is missions to North America. And Lamp Seminary started, if I remember Brian Kelso's um, testimony of how it started, I want to say he started it for like inmates, I believe is what I recall, so that men could study the scriptures, with some formal teaching wherever they were. And then it was pretty quick that he realized, well, this would be a really good fit for guys like, the situation I'm in, where I'm a little too old to just drop everything and, move to Orlando, or even though RTS has a campus here in Charlotte, I've got three kids, 8 and under. I can't just go to school full time. I don't have that kind of availability and that kind of freedom. So this seminary just was such a wonderful fit, and I've got to make some very good friends, other men that I'm in seminary with. And the other cool thing about it is, much like RPTS, which is up there in the Pittsburgh area, and their big brag at RPTS is that you're getting taught by pastors. That's what I'm getting. That's what Lamp is. So the men of our presbytery volunteer their time. They may get a small stipend. I don't know, not my business, but they give of themselves to teach these classes. So we do a lot of self-study. We do a lot of, reading and listening of lectures and things like that. And then, men from our presbytery facilitate the classes. They come and help us work through the material. So usually it's a teaching elder, but there are some ruling elders who have the, bona fides and the qualifications, scholastically to do it. And it's awesome, because then you get their practical take on ministry. And, some of them will say, hey, this isn't just something you need to know for class, but these are topics you're going to need to really absorb, because you're going to be asked these for ordination or licensure. So Lamp is a wonderful thing. If you're in the PCA and you're watching this episode and your area doesn't have it, reach out to Brian Kelso through M&A and see about maybe starting a chapter in your area. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't just have to be guys that feel like they're called to ministry. There are other men that take classes with us just on a, they're not taking the test or anything. They're just auditing the course. But they're auditing the course so that they can grow in their faith with Christ. They can learn all the same seminary level lessons that those of us who are going for credits are getting. And it's just a really cool. Lamp has been a godsend. I don't know how I could go to seminary if there was no such thing. So I'm grateful for Lamp.
Yeah, on that note, so Brian Kelso, his church in South Florida was planted out of the church that I came from. So the pastor at what was St. Andrew's PCA, now it's Park Road Pres, was best friends with Brian, because Brian used to actually work at Park Road. And it was exactly that. I mean, I don't know how old Lamp is now. It's over 20 years. And, there was no online classes at that point. And so if people wanted to do, like, there might have been distance education that seminaries were offering, where they were like mailing curriculum and you would send in your papers. And so Brian really pioneered a way to do presbytery-based seminary training that was at the caliber and level that the PCA requires. Yeah. And he really, he wrote position papers on this, and even did the research through like the stated clerk of the PCA and all this, just on that whole concept of presbytery-based tutorial training. And so it fits perfectly within the BCO. And what I think, so I'm very familiar with it from being in South Florida. But when I came up here and I saw what y'all were doing in Catawba Valley, I was really impressed, because I've never seen it implemented so coherently and well. Like, there's a lot of people in your presbytery that are going through it. And when my session, again, we were exploring the boundary change, we had come to a number of meetings, and we happened to be at one when, I won't embarrass him here by saying who he was, but he was getting ordained, and after graduating from Lamp. And my guys who are very involved ruling elders, they've been in Presbytery meetings for over 20 years. They said they had never seen as comprehensive as an ordination examination and the answers that they had seen from. And I would agree. I'm like, man, that was spot on. So I think what Catawba Valley is doing with this is great, and I'm glad you're able to benefit from it. Again, when this thing started, like there was no online anything. It wasn't a thing. And so, nowadays there are online programs and classes. All the seminaries have had to go to that, obviously, but there's still a place for what you're doing because it's cohort based. And so that's great. I'm glad you introduced us to that, and it is a part of M&A Ministries. And I think more and more seminaries in general have had to get more creative of how to get men ordained without sacrificing the standard. Because yeah, it's great if you have a 23-year-old that can dedicate the next 4 years of their life to get their MDiv, but that's not that's not a lot of our stories. I went to Knox and I was doing classes at night. I was having to take time off of work to do classes and get permission to do that. And it was, back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, really. And so, but now there's a lot of flexibility. And so, I'm doing my DMin through Birmingham Theological Seminary, which has great flexibility and also cohort-based things. And it's what program will fit the needs of the individual to get them the training, the experience, the knowledge. I love that the men in your presbytery, the teaching elders and ruling elders are part of that, because that's that discipleship process,
Yep.
So.
Well, and it's not sacrificing the academic rigor that's required to do what we need to do. So, I mean, it's what a cool combination of, a robust academic rigor and, like you said, the kind of discipleship piece of being able. It's given me an opportunity to meet some of the teaching elders that 3 times a year at Presbytery meeting, you don't really get to know each other that well. But when you get to do a class with these men, man, it's really cool, because I get to then start to see their heart for God and their heart for ministry, and I get to hear a little bit about them, and vice versa. They get to be exposed to those of us who God's calling into, being teaching elders. And so it's a wonderful co-op. And I can't imagine trading it for a more traditional seminary model. This is perfect for me.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, again, Cory, thanks for being on. And so, listeners, this is Cory Wing, ruling elder, soon to be teaching elder. And once again, just want to highlight his podcast or his show or his channel, or whatever he's calling it, but CivEccly Minded. Yep. And what I like about it, also, we didn't really talk about this. I mean, there's some long form content, but sometimes you do 5-minute mini episodes or 15-minute mini episodes. And I actually love those. Like, I listen to the long stuff, but I like the short stuff at times too, because it's just a perfect amount of time to, get a thought out. And you really kind of are very thoughtful in how you plan what you're going to say, or at least it seems like you must be, because it just comes very natural, and it hits the areas where they need to be hit. So
thank you, George.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
The heart of BTS is first and foremost to be faithful. Faithful to the Word of God, to the sufficiency of Scripture, to knowing we serve a sovereign Lord. The second component of the heart of BTS is accessibility. We're affordable. We're flexible. We work with students to help them achieve goals. This isn't our journey. It's your journey for serving the Lord. It's your journey that God has called you to. So we pray that while God expands and grows the opportunities that we have, that we never lose sight to provide quality, reformed theological education, faithfully and accessibly, so that we can serve the local church by building leaders for His kingdom.